John McClain, welcome back to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me.
Certainly, and I was thinking about you last week. We had Jerry Glanville on and talked about the Nick Saban days back in Houston, and I was thinking, man, I bet John could give us a lot of questions for Coach Glanville and sort of a little insight into that transition many, many years ago.
Jerry hired Nick over Pete Carroll. Pete had been with the Vikings. Nick, of course, had never been in the NFL. They had a really good staff then. They had been to the playoffs the year before after a 6-year absence, and that was the second of 7 consecutive playoff years, which was the most in the league. They never got to a Super Bowl, but they had a good staff, and when they hired Nick, I don't know if did Jerry tell you the story about before he made his decision how he took Nick for a ride?
No, he did not. Share us, please.
Jerry said this in a story that we did before the Alabama-Clemson championship game. We had a writer do a story on Nick when the Nick no one knows. And so I told him, well, you ought to do it when he came to the Oilers, and I put him in touch with a lot of players and coaches who'd been there at that time, and including Jerry Glanville. And Jerry told a story, and I never heard this, so I don't know if it's true, but it makes a great story. Jerry loved hot rod cars. He had cars redone. He liked to drive fast, and he said that he took coaches before he hired them on a ride and got up to about 120, and if they were scared and showed signs of being afraid, that he knew they couldn't coach with him. And Nick didn't bat an eye, and so he said, I knew I was going to hire that guy. So he hired Nick to coach the DBs in '88. He became known, and I know I've told you this, Ryan, he became known as Nick Satan to the DBs because back then the media could go in the dressing room during the day and just hang out while players were in meetings, and invariably we'd see the locker room would be empty because players were at their position meetings, but there might be a defensive back sitting in front of his locker. And you'd ask him, what are you doing out here? Well, Satan kicked me out for spitting sunflower seeds. Nick was tough on him, and Mike Holovac, who was the personnel director, went on to be the general manager. Mike, as the assistant GM and personnel director, liked to sit in position meetings and watch the coaches coach the players. And I knew Mike really well, and it was probably October of '88, which was the second month of the season. Mike told me, he said, I like this new defensive backs coach. I said, why? He said, because he's tough on those defensive backs. And they had a lot of young, cocky guys. They had a mixture of veterans. A lot of them had been drafted first, second, third round. And Jerry Glanville enabled him. They were known as the dirtiest defense in the league. They played in the House of Pain, the nickname for the Astrodome. They had more personal foul penalties than anybody, but the defense, the secondary was very disciplined, and Mike said it was because this rookie coach who was demanding didn't take any grief from him, and if they tested him, then he'd kick him out for the rest of that meeting. And one time, a safety, Keith Bostic, they said was asleep, and Nick asked Glanville what to do, and Glanville said, well, go over and shake him and wake him up. And he did, and Bostic, who was big, jumped up and jumped all over Nick because he scared him. And they pulled Bostic off, but Bostic didn't go to sleep again. And Nick was only here 2 years, but there's some good stories about his coaching. And I think I've told you this, Ryan. When he left to go to the University of Toledo, I told a TV reporter here, Mark Berman, he and I have been covering this football here for almost 40 years. I said, well, that secondary coach, Saban, will never make it in college football. He never talks to anybody. Nick was so quiet, kept his mouth shut. I had a conversation with him once by a water cooler, but he just kept his mouth shut, and he watched and he learned. And then when he was in his players, that's when his personality came out. And I said, he'll never make it in college football because he won't be able to recruit anybody.
Yeah, it's always amazing when you go back and you study it and you talk. And I did notice that article back in January Hunter Atkins was just
Hunter
looking,
Atkins wrote it. Yeah.
Great article, and
wasn't that a good article?
It was solid from the Houston Chronicle talking about it. And I know a lot of us were focused on the national championship, but matter of fact, I was going to reach out to Hunter and at some point try to get him on because I thought it was just a great insight into Nick Saban, and it's always fun to go back. I love the history of the game that we have a chance to cover, and whether it's the NFL draft or college football. I always love when people like yourself can go back and help us connect the dots. And, you spend 10 years. I mean, we've covered Nick Saban. I've covered him for 11 years here. I'm always trying to learn more about what's he like behind the scenes and connecting those dots.
It's funny you say that because Hunter Atkins was about 12 when Nick was here, and they assigned it because he's a good takeout, long-form feature writer, and that's what he does for us. And so I had to tell him everything, who they were. The Astrodome was called the House of Pain. And it was kind of like coaching up a rookie, even though he's an accomplished feature writer, just because he wasn't familiar with the Oilers at that time. He knew all about Nick. And Nick's life's an open book. His personality's an open book. But he wanted stories like that. And a lot of players, and, of course, Jerry Glanville, since he hired him, and Glanville's a great storyteller, I believe Jerry's living in Knoxville now, and I knew that once he got Jerry, he would be great. Floyd Reese, former general manager who was linebackers coach then longtime general manager of the Titans, now talk show host in Nashville. Floyd was real good, and those were fun times. It's amazing to me, Ryan, how many people don't know that Nick Saban started in NFL here. They always think, oh, well, he started in the NFL with Bill Belichick in Cleveland. No, he did not. And that's where he made his reputation because he was defensive coordinator. Glanville did not have a defensive or offensive coordinator because he called the defenses. And so it was fun time because both of Nick's years, they were good. They made the playoffs, won a couple of playoff games that fell short of the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's always amazing. And I was just looking at that photo. Even though we live in a big college football world, it's always connected. Like June Jones was on that staff. Well, to tie back June Jones, he just sent Nick Saban a hotshot freshman quarterback by the name of Tua Tagovailoa from out in Hawaii that's just showed up here as an early enrollee and who lit up A-Day. So you connect June Jones, which coached him in Hawaii. Now he sent a hotshot quarterback to Nick Saban. So the small little world of the coaching fraternity is unique.
The pictures were good, too. You see how much – now, Nick, I think one of the reasons Saban looks so young now because he's the same size as he was his whole life because he's so disciplined. And he's still got a lot of hair, but did you notice how he had even more hair then?
I did.
And those big reflector sunglasses he had in one of the pictures we ran. And of course, nobody could imagine that Nick Saban was gone, and probably along with Bear Bryant, maybe the greatest coaches in college football history, and Nick may end up being the greatest coach in college football history. Nobody saw that. I've always thought, and I know your listeners will cringe, I would like to see what Nick could do back in the NFL if he had control of personnel, because he wanted Drew Brees when he was with the Dolphins. They gave it Dante Culpepper with a knee injury, and the rest is history. And his general manager had control of personnel. Now, Nick Saban can go anywhere he wanted with any amount of money and any kind of control of whatever he wanted, but I don't see, and I'm sure you don't either, see him ever leaving Alabama.
No, I don't either. And I think the athletic director was on a couple of weeks ago, and he's making $7 million, and I said, why don't you go ahead and just pay the man where we don't even have to worry about him ever thinking about retiring, because I don't see this Nick Saban personality. I think he would be an unhappy, miserable person sitting on the sidelines observing the game of college football. The guy's
Terry would be making him go back to work somehow.
Yeah, she would. Yeah, she would. And John, I may connect with you, might offer you a rib or something. I'd love to talk with some DBs, as we travel throughout this offseason, what he was like back there to look and sort of compare. It's always fun to see how coaches change. And, John, it's amazing how we got this conversation started. Let me work to the NFL draft here for a couple of minutes.
Let me tell you right quick.
Okay.
If you want to connect with some of those defensive backs, text me and I'll give you their numbers because most of them are still here in Houston. and because Nick was such a good coach. Now, they're only going to tell you the good stuff. Like one of them wouldn't tell Hunter Atkins the sunflower seed story. He claimed he didn't remember, and I said, "Yeah, I remember," but he didn't. He wouldn't talk about that. And but they like talking about anything involving Oilers history, and they like talking about Nick Saban, considering how famous and successful Nick has become.
Yeah, it's pretty fun to go back, and we love. It's one of the niches of our program is featuring legends of college football, not just Alabama football, but SEC football. And you go back, we had a chance last year. I know you were part of our program with Kenny Stabler. We're trying to get him in the Hall of Fame, and we went back and talked to all these different people. And it's just fun to be a part of that as far as to try to preserve the history of our game.
I agree 100%.
John, let me ask you about this NFL draft. I'm reading some reports out here that Cleveland may jump over Myles Garrett and not take it. Is this just a day before draft talk? Are you buying this?
This is mainly put out by the national media, not the local media that cover the Browns. They say there's a division in the ranks based on analytics of what they want. But if they took Trubisky with 1 year as a starter as the first pick in the draft, we shouldn't be surprised because they're the Browns and they've been one screw up after another. Even if Myles Garrett never pans out, he is by far the highest rated prospect in this draft. He has been for 3 years. I've been watching him since after his freshman year. All these national people say whenever he comes out, he's going to be the first pick, just like Jadeveon Clowney. Well, because of injuries, it wasn't until his third year when Clowney had a great season, All-Pro, Pro Bowl, and now everybody, realizes the Texans made the right pick. Well, Myles Garrett's just like Clowney, but also like Clowney, people are picking him apart right now. And if they take Trubisky over him because they're scared that another team's going to take him, what they should do is take Garrett at number 1. You've got the 12th pick. You are loaded with other picks. Tennessee at number 5 is looking to recoup a number 2. They don't have a 2. Give them a 2 and then move up and get your quarterback. You'd be getting Trubisky, swapping first-round picks, giving the 33rd overall pick. And if you believe he's your franchise quarterback and you seriously consider him number 1, that's not a lot to pay. And so that makes so much sense, but they're the Browns. Somehow you think they're going to screw it up. But I say Myles Garrett is so talented. He's been so good in the offseason. He's such a good person. He's a role model. He'll be great on and off the field, that even the Browns won't screw this up, Ryan.
Let's see. I had an NFL draft guy a couple of weeks ago, and he made a quote, and I love it. He said, "The Browns couldn't find a collar in a shirt factory." He said it's.
Oh, that's a good line. I like that.
So that's one of those Dan Shunka lines up at ourlads.com. John, let me work into some of these Alabama guys. When you look at O.J. Howard, you look at Jonathan Allen, you look at Reuben Foster. He may slide a little bit because of the recent issues. What do you see in a couple of those Alabama guys? Maybe your thoughts.
Well, let me tell you this. NFL teams don't care if a guy tests positive for pot or if he's a diluted sample, whatever it is. What they don't like is when you hit a woman, or in the case of Gary and Conley, who I don't think he goes from middle of the first round to out of the first round, maybe out of the draft, and because of this rape charge I can't remember where it was.
Cleveland.
And Cleveland.
It was in Cleveland Hotel, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, Cleveland Westin Hotel. And a guy like Foster, that's not going to hurt him. I mean, he's talked to these teams over and over. He's a 3-down linebacker. He's going to be a great prospect. The problem is that he's at a position that now there's not as much value in as there are the outside pass rushers. So I think he's going to Cincinnati or New Orleans. Jonathan Allen's obviously going to be the top pick. I've vacillated. I've done 8 mock drafts, just sent my last one in. I've had him going to Chicago 3 or Tennessee 5. I know Tennessee would not pass him up, but I don't see if I think I had Tennessee taking him at 5, Chicago taking Jamal Adams, the safety from LSU, who's better than Malik Hooker at Ohio State. And then I have Fournette going 4. And then Howard, I think I have to the Bills at 10. Foster to the Bengals or Saints, I can't remember. And then those three are high. And I have Humphrey going somewhere late, a run on corners. And then I believe Anderson, Tomlinson, and Williams will all go in the second round.
Yeah, it's a chance Alabama may tie that record of 5 first-rounders. We were talking in January they might be able to squeak in 6, but I don't think that's going to happen. It looks like maybe 4 or 5 are going to be that locks for that first round. John, how much do you have to calculate? You may have been the one that told me this. When you look at Nick Saban players or any of these quality coaches in college football, a lot of times they're maxed out when we talk about talent. There's not much between what they have now and that ceiling. How much do you sort of have to calculate that in, the growth for some of these Alabama guys that come through this 33rd franchise of the NFL here in Tuscaloosa?
Well, see, I've never thought that. I've never heard that. I've heard people tell me that if you go get a Nick Saban guy from that program, that you know they're going to be well coached, you know they're going to be winners. Now, they may have some off-the-field issues. Almost every school has players with some off-the-field issues. It just depends on what it is. And I just left out Cam Robinson. Of course, he'll go somewhere in the bottom of the first round. And speaking of off-the-field issues, but teams, you know, they investigate these guys like crazy. You know, when the Texans took Kareem Jackson, Nick had told him, according to Kareem, if you can break at 4.5, go. But I think you should come back. Well, he broke a 4.5. He came. He's been a starter every year since he was drafted and has gotten not better now, but his career started slow. Like most underclassmen, they could use another year in college, but it's amazing to me the way they just restock and replenish there. And so the SEC, of course, is always the most popular conference, but there are certain schools. I remember back in the 80s, people were very leery of Auburn players. They were talented, but they just didn't pan out. They had issues off the field, and so some teams would stay away from them. And Alabama at one point, this is way before Nick got there, people say those kids come out, they need a year on the weight program. Obviously, they got a program, but a lot of them are not lifting. And when they come, the first time they line up and get beat by stronger people, they lose their confidence. So you have to put them on a weight program for a year. Now, of course, everybody's got the biggest possible weight room, and they're so much more sophisticated about strength and rehab and diet that you don't see that as much. And so I think it's no wonder that Alabama has so many players who are drafted so prominently because they've been so successful.
John, man, I look up at the clock, and you and I get to talking. I'm going to have to get you on a little bit later in the summer. We can stretch our legs a little bit, and you can tell us more stories because we're all sitting on the edge of our chair. But I promised all of our interns behind the scenes that are part of our program, and I told that John was going to come up. You've been in the business for 38 years. A lot of them are watching what's happening right now with all these massive layoffs, and someone that's up and coming in this business, they're all concerned about journalism and where it may go. What advice would you give a young journalist? Because you've been successful for many, many years. What would you tell some of our folks that are behind the scenes that are up and coming in this business?
This is my 44th year as a sports writer. I started when I was a sophomore at Baylor. I've been at the Chronicle 42 years, 38 on the NFL full-time. I learned early on to branch out and do radio. I've been doing regular radio here. I now do 19 weekly radio shows in 9 cities and try not to turn anybody down because I've always figured if you're nice enough to ask me if I can do it, I do it. And I've tried to be an old dog you can teach new tricks when it comes to the changing face of our profession, but it's all going to be about digital. Talk radio will never go away. Newspapers are going away. People are going to get their information on their smartphones. They even tell me that portable computers are going to be gone because everybody's going to have a tablet or their smartphone. You're going to be able to manipulate how big the face is. And so know everything. If it's Snapchat, if it's any new invention, know everything you can possibly know. They like young people who are cheap, so that's good. If you're young, you're cheap, but it's hard to make a lot of money and you have to move a lot. But if you understand the pitfalls going into this business, whether it's newspaper/websites, radio, TV, it's an incredible profession. You think about how lucky everybody is in Tuscaloosa and Alabama in general to get to cover maybe the greatest program in the history of college sports, loaded with number one picks every year with one of the greatest coaches. That's got to be fun. I know Nick can be a pain to deal with if you're in the media, but to me that is so much offset by the fact that he wins. I've never covered a team here in the Super Bowl. Before I go, Ryan, I'd like to cover one time. I've covered 40 Super Bowls. I'd like to cover one with my team in it. So it's an incredible profession, very rewarding, and I'd say if you understand